Welcome to The Gap, where it's our mission to bridge the gap between training and on-field performance.
I'm Brett Hart, owner of Hitman Performance.
And I'm Dan Labadia, the owner of Jack Javelin.
Hope you guys enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back to this episode of The Gap. Today we have Mike Stein, thrower from Iowa, joining us today. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about Mike's process throwing in high school at a state that did not allow high school javelin. So he's going to talk a little bit about that, and then, of course, the training stuff. So, Mike, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast again.
Yeah, we had him on 2 years ago with his coach, Kevin Foster, back when we were called the Mass Monsters podcast.
Was he in single digits? Was he in a single digit episode, or was it?
It's episode 10.
Wow,
so
you just cracked it.
So what I remember is we actually recorded the episode as Mass Monsters, but by the time it came out, it was the first episode we had switched to The Gap.
That's right.
Wow.
What a time to be alive.
Come a long way.
Throwback.
Come a long way.
Yeah. But Mike, so just give us a little bit of brief introduction. What's your PR? Where do you go to school? How old are you?
Yeah. So, I'm Mike Stein. I go to University of Iowa. I've thrown 81 meters, just over 81 meters. I threw that at Big Ten Championships in 2024 in that one. And then I'm from Okoboji, Iowa, which is a small town in northwest Iowa. And as you may know, Iowa does not have javelin as a sport or as an event in track and field. We don't even have anything like it, like a softball toss or turbo jav. We have nothing. So, yeah, I just bought a javelin and I taught myself how to throw.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you came from a baseball background. Little trouble hitting the strike zone, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I led the state in hit by pitch, I think. Double digits for hit by pitch. So had some velocity though.
Effectively wild.
Effectively wild is correct. I still had good numbers. I think I got third team all state, if that counts.
Hey, it's up there.
It's up there.
But so go into your process of like, how did you even discover javelin in the first place?
Yeah, so I was in the Instagram rabbit hole of, the throwing community. I saw Ian Walsh from Driveline Baseball and those guys starting to use javelin training methods. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Like, for baseball, would I have really needed it at that point? Looking back, probably not, but I'm sure happy I was interested and intrigued in that style of training. So I wanted to implement some of these javelin methods. So I reached out to Scott Fuchs, who threw at Iowa State, and I was like, hey, is there anything you use, in your warm-ups or in your training methods that could potentially be used for baseball? And I could long toss a long way. I was proportionally way better on long toss. I could long toss about 350 feet as a freshman, sophomore in high school with a run-in into it. So I was essentially training for javelin already. And it eventually got to the point where I was like, wow, this is more geared towards what I want to do anyways. I love just ripping the piss out of an implement and running into it. And it's a very high velocity, fast twitch sport. And I just loved the idea of it. So Scott told me, okay, the conversation evolved to how do I get into javelin? And he's like, all right, you just got to buy one on Amazon, man, and get some spikes and start throwing a grass field. So I bought like $150 javelin off of Amazon. And it showed up to my house. My parents kind of knew that I was thinking about this event, but they didn't think I was actually gonna do this. And so everyone thought I was crazy for buying a javelin. But I threw the javelin then for the first time later that week. I'm like, yeah, this is the sport I want to do.
So Mike, talk a little bit about that importance of having a good arm and being able to long toss over a football field, because I think a lot of people, they look at the javelin and they try to get the perfect technique down, but I've talked to a lot of 80-meter throwers in my time, and every 80-meter thrower I've ever talked to was able to long toss over a football field or throw 60 meters from a 3-step or a 1-step. So obviously there's a technique component, there's an approach component, but at what point are we just neglecting the fact that you do need to have a really good arm to throw the javelin?
Yeah, I think it's very neglected, especially in places like Europe where they might not have this, general throwing background. They definitely have an advantage having more javelin specific technique, but I think there's a big benefit to just having that general movement pattern of throwing. And, you know what hip shoulder separation is. You know how to absolutely rip and implement super far. And it gives your body an analogy to where then you're able to implement the javelin technique a lot easier. And it just makes sense. So if you can't throw a baseball, 300, 350 feet, it's going to be hard to know what you're trying to do with the javelin. It's going to feel like a foreign movement. And, I've worked with some kids that didn't come from that baseball background, and I noticed it's a lot harder for them to pick up some of these throwing specific technique when they've never really thrown anything to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm in agreement there. And a big thing that I notice is a person that is able to throw a baseball or a plyo ball very well is just able to transfer their energy better. They're able to understand that throwing position better. And, just little things that, like, if I'm working with a kid who doesn't have much of a baseball or a football throwing background, they're doing things like they're forgetting to pick up their left foot and step into the throw. Their left arm is all over the place. Like, they don't know how to use their block side at all. And so just getting those reps in with the plyo balls and with the baseballs is so important for just developing that throwing athleticism that it actually helps a lot more people than you realize. We just had Dr. Heenan on last week, and he was talking about how a lot of times when he has people that have these throwing issues and he's trying to train them as pitchers, he'll just give them a heavy plyo ball and just throw it as hard as they can. And a lot of times it just cleans up their mechanics, and it just teaches them a movement pattern that forces them to relax, forces them to use their body in a way that you're not really able to do when you're trying to focus on throwing through the point and having the proper technique and starting to seemingly overthink things when you have the javelin in your hand. So that's great insight on your part. And I think a lot more people need to hear that throwing ability, and like being able to do a 350 foot long toss at 14, 15 years old is just, I mean, that's insane in my eyes. So after you get the javelin from Amazon, you're starting to throw a little bit. What was that progression like at that point?
Yeah, so like we were just talking about, my general throwing was really good. So I had an idea of what I was trying to do, but there's definitely a lot of specific javelin technique where it's not the idea of throwing is throwing yet until you kind of get acquainted with the javelin and how it feels. So Scott Fuchs and I were messaging back and forth. I'd send him my throws, and he'd simply just tell me what to do. He'd say, put your arm here. You need a little bit longer arm. You need to get a longer pull. And I understood what that meant, and from the general throwing, I knew what he was talking about. So it just kind of progressed from there, where I worked on the release. I got the idea of throwing through the point. I got the feel of throwing the javelin. I would throw like a lot more at that stage. I'd throw, 4 times a week because I was throwing pretty light, and it wasn't going to hurt me to throw a lot just to get acquainted with the feeling of the javelin. So the number one thing was getting comfortable with the javelin in my hand, where I could get to the point where it almost felt like throwing a baseball again. And once I felt that, then I was able to then work a little bit on footwork and the progression into the approach, where I could use some momentum to get me to amplify those throwing positions.
So at this point, are you still using the javelin to assist your baseball throwing, or are you now starting to think about it a little bit more long term?
Yeah, I started thinking about it long term. Honestly, as soon as I had my first throwing session, I'm like, I want to go to the Olympics. So I was watching all those Jan Zelezny hype videos, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I still loved playing baseball. I love pitching, and I was like, my velocity is going to increase if I just keep training for javelin anyways. So I'm going to get better at both. But then I kind of just sold out on like, I want to be one of the greatest javelin throwers of all time. And I think that's one thing with the javelin that, you know, it gave me a goal and a mission to build towards, where in baseball I felt a little bit lost, where it's like, there's hundreds of guys, thousands of guys now who could throw 95 to 100 miles an hour. And it was easy to feel like, oh, you're just another guy. But how many guys can throw 80, 85, 90 plus meters? There's not very many. I mean, there's maybe 30 guys all time or less who have thrown 90 meters. So I knew that if I did that, it was going to take me a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that having that, just selling out and just going all in on it, is going to be really helpful for a lot of kids to hear that are kind of teetering on that fence of, do I want to do this full time, or do I want to play multiple sports or go play multiple sports in college and whatnot. And just the sooner you dedicate your life to it, essentially, the better you'll be. I know a lot of times kids will have to kind of fall flat on their face in order to get to that point. So going forward, what are some of the obstacles that you had to overcome to get to the point where you are trying to compete in a state that doesn't have javelin?
So once I was working on the skill, that was a big part, getting used to the approach, getting used to the throwing. But just as much was an obstacle of finding out, where to throw because my state didn't have it. So actually shout out to Ryan Bell. He told me you can register on Direct Athletics to get into these meets. So Direct Athletics has like a registrar of all the meets that are available. And in track, the beautiful thing is that you can compete unattached and you can, compete for yourself. So if you're in a state that doesn't have javelin, you can go to college meets even. I went to small college meets like D3 meets. And I went to my siblings were competing at Central College in Pella. So I'm like, that's an easy in. I'm going to talk to the coach. I'm going to register for the meet and I'm going to go throw there. And I was able to get into the meet and I threw like 57 meters. So that was a good starting point to get recruited.
So is that the first time you had ever thrown? I mean, you had obviously thrown a javelin full effort in practice, right?
Yeah,
So
I
where
was
where did
I was
that?
like ripping full approaches, at that point for a good year or two actually.
Okay,
Because
so yeah.
during this time COVID also happened before this. So I would have competed that year probably in like AAU type meets. I didn't know about the direct athletics thing yet. So I would have gone to like AAU meets and tried to compete there probably that year.
What would you say is a disadvantage to being in a state that didn't have javelin at your high school?
Yeah, I think, I was lucky because I had people in my corner like Scott Fuchs and you guys like helping me and texting back and forth, like, this is what you need to do. And I had Kevin making workouts for me and programming for me. But if you're in a state without javelin and you don't know where to start and you don't necessarily have people helping you and making programs and helping you develop, then you're going to kind of be lost and you're just going to go out and throw. I think what worked for me was I had a system of development of how to end up throwing, 60 meters plus and get recruited. And I think in states that don't have that, you're not going to know exactly how to get to that point. You're just going to kind of go out and throw and, try to figure everything out on your own. And I think that's a really tough thing to do.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Is like you kind of, I mean, you call yourself lucky, but really you did a lot of due diligence of putting yourself out there and finding those answers and finding your tribe. And that's something that Kevin talked about when he was on our podcast last year. Is like you need to find your tribe, whether it is in person or online. You need to be able to have a coach to guide you and people to push you and people to communicate with and hold you accountable that are on that same mission.
100%.
So going into, so after that year, you ended up throwing 59 meters after opening up at 57. I have it memorized. So, so then you take a year off because you ran into an elbow issue.
Yeah.
What would you say was that leading cause of that elbow issue? Is there anything looking back that you think you could have done differently?
Yeah, I think I was, pretty naive. I was throwing through soreness and I was trying a lot of crazy exercises to just increase my layback and range of pull, which was great. But you have to realize, when you do something in training, like, I was like dangling like a kettlebell in the leg back position, like holding isometrics there. And that was a good idea, but that can conflict with actually throwing, which is the most important thing because that's where you're going to develop. So I think I had a lot of, fatigue in my arm and stuff, and I kind of ignored my body. And that's been a theme with all of my injuries is ignorance of how I'm feeling and then pushing through it. And then you get hurt because javelin, at the end of the day, is a very violent event. And you have to sell out on feeling good in your throwing sessions. And if you don't feel good, it's not worth throwing through that pain unless it's, the Big Ten championships or something.
Based off your story and all the success that you've had, what would it mean to you to bring Iowa high school javelin?
That would be amazing. I think, I think this whole entire story of mine has, led to a lot of blessings in my life and opened up a lot of doors for me. And I want that for other kids. I want kids to feel like they have a mission. I think javelin, is a way of making your life better and, improving yourself. And I feel like a lot of kids don't have that these days. And that's what, society really needs right now. And if we had more opportunities for kids instead of taking away these opportunities, these states, they think, oh, it's dangerous. But look what it's done for me. Nobody's gotten, hit with the javelin, and I've, had all these opportunities because I took the risk to, throw. So,
Yeah, and just so people out there know too, like my whole goal with this movement that I started is to get javelin in all 50 states. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the one that's fronting all of the research, all of the prep work, all of the logistics of what we need to get it done. And then I'm assigning a team of 3 to 5 people in each state. So for you, for example, you are going to be a part of Team Iowa, and then I have 2 to 3 other contacts in that state that have come forward even since we spoke last night. And so I'm going to create a group chat and an email thread and a presentation for you guys to go present to a board of athletic directors. And I think the biggest thing for everyone is to just be prepared for the process to take a while, because it's going to be multiple emails of going back and forth trying to get on their presentation schedule. Then you're going to have to go present. They'll vote on it. Is it going to continue or is it going to stop? And then if it continues, you'll have to present again, and hopefully it'll go through. And then if it fails, you have to go through again the next year and essentially play it year by year. And so my goal with this whole thing is to try to just expedite the process, because I was talking to Ryan Bell the other night actually, and so he competed I think in high school in like 2005, because he's 10 years older than me. And so when he was in high school, there was only 9 states that had javelin. Then by the time I graduated high school in 2017, there were 17 states that had javelin. So in that decade, it pretty much doubled. Then now, since I've been out of high school 8 years ago, we've added an additional 7 states to now we're up to 24. So I see, all right, we're adding about 8 to 10 states every 10 years roughly. And so, if you figure in 30 years, we would be at 50. All right, what could we do to speed that process up so that it could happen in 5 to 10 years? Yeah. And so that's what fires me up. And that's what's really cool about me being able to do this as my full-time job at 26 is now in the fall and in the winter, what am I going to do to occupy my time? And that's push the sport forward. And big thing that I did last year was I came out with the app. And then this year I finalized the free course and made the plyo balls, right? Because I'm trying to make resources more available to javelin throwers. And plyo balls were something that I saw was not readily available to people because, we would be using baseball companies' plyo balls, which didn't have the 600 gram and the 800 gram plyo balls that we needed. It's really hard to find a 2 kilogram plyo ball because a lot of companies discontinued those because they were heavy and not a lot of baseball players were using them. So now I'm like, all right, well, why don't I just make a brand that has 600, 800, 2K, and then all the weights in between. So that's essentially my goal, is to make javelin mainstream and solve the problems that the javelin community has. And, it just fires me up to be able to year by year just kind of check those boxes off. And now, like I said in my original post, I've done a lot, like with the YouTube, with the app, with the plyo balls, with the camp. But now all the goals that I have going forward are going to take a lot longer, right? Like having a facility one day where javelin throwers can come and train year round, no matter the weather. And that's going to take a while to get to. Having all 50 states have javelin legalized at the high school level, that's going to take a long time to get to that point. But anything we could do to just chip away at the process, because I just see that there's a lot of issues that we've been able to solve just by working relentlessly at them for the last 2 years. And, I give you and Kevin a lot of credit for starting that Instagram wave of bringing awareness to the sport. And I was able to join you guys in that about 2 years ago. And, we've all done a tremendous job of pushing the sport forward. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
100%. And I think, you see in Europe, they have these specialized, universities for javelin and track technique. But in the States, we have a lot of guys who can throw a baseball 100 miles an hour. And we need to bridge that gap where these guys are able to throw the javelin and get acquainted with the javelin, because, we could have some 90-meter throwers. We have all the talent in the world in this country. And you see it in India, they have 85, 90-meter throwers, a new one every single year. Yet we have all these guys who are throwing 100 miles per hour, but they've never thrown a javelin. How far could they throw? How far could Patrick Mahomes throw a javelin if you gave him one? If he got
Yeah.
used to throwing it?
I mean, that's a great point. And then even from a talent pool perspective, you have, if you have 50 states, that's our whole talent pool. Well, we have 24 states that
We
have
have
javelin.
half the country, not
So
even.
yeah, so now we're cutting the talent pool in half. Aside from the fact that the coaching and the resources aren't as or weren't as readily available to people up until this year, and so that being said, it's like, all right, well, step one was educate everyone in America, right?
Yeah.
Through the YouTube, through the Instagram, through the app, through the podcast. Now we're getting the education side pretty much down pat. And, Kevin has been huge in that and being able to be like revolutionary in the way that he's thought about it. I like to think that I've been revolutionary in the way of like putting it out there in the long form content with the YouTube and the app and the podcast of making it, maybe more easy digestible for some people, and kind of trying to implement other sports. Like I've used football as examples, I've used baseball as examples and stuff like that, so that we could get some of those kids that are maybe a struggling quarterback that's like, I don't know if I want to go to a college and go sit the bench for 3 years just to maybe sniff the field as a senior, or a pitcher who's like, all right, I might be able to go play indie ball league one day, even though I'm throwing 90 miles an hour, because the competition level is so high in baseball. Maybe a 90-mile-an-hour pitcher pivots to javelin a little earlier, and he's the next Olympic champ. And so that's where you look at like, all right, we need to expand the resources, which we've done, and then now it's expand the reach and expand the talent pool to be able to get the people to be able to do that. And that's a big thing too, is like another step in my process of getting the word out is when a state does legalize javelin, I'm going to hopefully have the opportunity to host a seminar with them over Zoom of just all the coaches in the state that are interested in learning about javelin. Like I'll walk you through everything I know and do my best to educate those coaches in that state to be able to teach the javelin in a safe way so that they're on the right track going forward.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I think as an outsider looking in, because like I've never thrown a jav, never was interested in javelin until I met Dan, and then even Kevin Foster stuff, and then Mike, your content is like what it is, like promoting the javelin, seeing your training and what you guys are doing, and I was just thinking about the baseball pipeline because I played baseball and how many of those 90, 95, 100-mile an hours just will never have a chance to go up because at the end of the day, baseball is a business. And we just had Juice Factory on like 2 hours ago. He says hi, by the way. He said, but I've been in the baseball world. I've talked to a lot of high level guys that just get kicked down because they have one bad outing and then they're kind of out of the game. But they still have the athleticism. They still have the talent, but then they kind of lose their passion and purpose to throw hard and to throw far. And that's what I think an outlet could be for them is the javelin, or if they want that pipeline of failed baseball pitcher to javelin pipeline is, we joke about it, but it's like
It's running strong.
it's but even then, for the reason for javelin being banned is I'm assuming danger.
Yeah.
But you can let kids play baseball all year round, throw 100 to 200 pitches like in any given day, like including warm-ups, long tossed, and go on the mound and then do cool downs and do a bullpen the next day, and they don't have any off season, and they're not promoting strength and mobility and movement and diet. Like the whole javelin world seems to be very holistic and to have a full human approach to it from my eyes, from what I see. And I would argue even just the baseball year round is inherently more dangerous to youth kids' arms than learning how to properly throw a javelin.
100%. And that's the thing with javelin is, if you get the technique, it might be a somewhat of a violent event, but once you get the technique, it feels really effortless. And you're not taking hundreds and hundreds of throws, and you're not going to get these chronic conditions that you see in baseball where, you have kids now that are 12, 13 years old and they're tearing their UCL. And, I've had elbow problems from javelin, but that was all very preventable looking back at it. And I'm with this holistic lifestyle and the way we train, you're able to rehab from these injuries and, continue to perform and do what you love. And you're not going to get some of these, kids that are 12, 13 years old throwing 200 pitches in a tournament and, their career could be over from that.
Yeah, that's just from my point of view and my perspective. I think what you guys are doing to push the sport forward is something definitely to be admired and something definitely to be excited about. I mean, I never thought I would care so much about javelin a couple of years ago, and now I'm here now, like, yeah, making it mainstream. I mean, we didn't have javelin in our high school. Like, that wasn't a thing. Like, it was shot put. I don't even think we had discus or hammer. None of the other throwing events. I think it was just shot put.
It's a thing that genuinely appeals to a lot of young men who are and women who are athletic. It's, a very intense event. It's fast twitch, it's powerful, and you get to throw an implement as far as you can. I mean, that's track. So great about track and field is it's the essence of all other sports. Every other sport branch off of track and field. How fast can you run? How far can you throw? And we need to return to this because there's a lot of kids who are super athletic and would benefit from having javelin in their state.
It's so output driven as well. We've talked about it before, and that's where I was saying about the holistic whole life approach to it. Like, if you don't level yourself up just as a person, you're going to clearly see in your throws that they're not going the way you want it to go.
Exactly. You can tell there's a one-to-one correlation of, my lifestyle, my life off the track, and how well I even throw at practice or in a meet. And it really forces you to improve yourself every single day.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that I found too was when I was younger and struggling, I pretty much just cared so much about the sport and I had to learn how to adapt. And through that adaptation, I was able to learn more about myself and I was able to be like, all right, now I need to change and become more mobile. And then, all right, now I need to be more fast and explosive. Then, all right, now I need to revisit the technique. All right, now I need more baseball and plyo ball throws or whatever to get me to the next level. And then it was a lot of just mindset work that happened along the way as well. And that's what I use every day in my life now is, all right, how do I adapt as a coach? How do I adapt to the athlete that I'm coaching? Dane Miller from Garage Strength talks about the two different types of athletes. There's the people that care a lot, and then there's the people that don't care at all. There's the people that take compliments really well. There's people that need the the push to push them to be better and can handle that push and are almost better when you are harder on them. And so you need to learn what type of athletes you're working with as a coach. And even for me, like with Brett being on this podcast, a big thing that I've been working on is my public speaking and my ability to articulate my thoughts in a long form content manner, better at podcast producing and trying to improve the quality of the podcast, improve my editing and teaching Brett how to edit and all of those things that correlate to then the YouTube and then the business. And then, all right, now how can I grow this camp next year to be bigger than it was this year and get more people involved and impact more people's lives? How can I now in my off season branch out and try to get javelin legalized in more of those states that don't have it? It's that self-improvement process that I have to this day that people see and they're like, oh, wow, you're really on a mission. It's like that mission started from javelin and it started as a javelin athlete. And it taught me so much of that self-improvement, every centimeter, that 1 centimeter a day mentality that took me to where I am now. And now that I'm not a competing athlete anymore, I have that mindset towards the mission of javelin and towards my livelihood.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And for me, that's been the big thing too, is I wouldn't be speaking to you guys on a podcast if it wasn't for javelin. I might not even be at the University of Iowa, going through school if javelin didn't allow me to have these opportunities. And, it's allowed all these blessings and all these areas of self-improvement off the track. But at the same time, like you were saying earlier, how many things in training do we get to work on, as side quests? As a javelin thrower, you're working on, throwing a plyo ball or a baseball. You're working on strength training. You're working on Olympic lifts. You're working on even gymnastic training and mobility. There's so many ways to improve yourself, improve your health and your body. And what appealed to me actually for javelin right away was all these different facets of training that you just don't get when you're in a specialized, baseball only program. And that's what appealed to me about Javelin was I get to do all of these methods of training. I get to explore what works for me.
Talk a little bit about your evolution of training from like when you started to where you're at now. I'm curious to hear how you went through rabbit holes and how you came out of it and what you took from it.
For sure. So when I was first starting, I definitely, as any high school kid, I just needed to get bigger and stronger and faster. So I worked with Bill Miller and, he worked a lot on my general strength, but we also worked on a lot of athletic movement. So I've kind of had a holistic training experience my whole training career because I never sold out necessarily on one area. I, I'd get stronger, I'd get bigger, but I'd also work on sprinting and I'd work on mobility. And then that's another thing. I worked a ton on my movement capacity with mobility ability with Kevin's program. And I worked a lot on sprinting. I took a lot from coaches like Chris Corfus and Tony Holler. And my brother's a sprinter, so I learned quite a bit from him. That's kind of how it started in high school. And then you get to the NCAA system and you're going to get a lot stronger really quick. So then it's on you to kind of pick up the slack with some of the missing gaps, such as, mobility, sprinting, plyos, athleticism. And I'll admit there was, a few years where I put on 20 pounds in a year and I got a lot bigger. And now I'm trying to work that pendulum back to being super athletic at the weight I'm at. So I went from 175 pounds to 195 pounds, got a lot stronger, but I was lacking a little bit with my athleticism again in sprinting and plyometrics. So the pendulum swinging back towards that, fast twitch, high CNS type work, where before I was working a lot on, heavy volume in the weight room, even heavy volume of running, and those are great things. But now I'm able to work on, getting fast twitch and getting those qualities that these elite throwers have.
What exactly are you following right now in terms of trying to get fast twitch? Because I saw the Marv Marinovich weighted balls on the yoga ball, and
So I've evolved quite a bit. So I'm still obviously doing a lot of the NCAA lifting, and I think a lot of that has benefit. But at the same time, I was definitely lacking in speed, athleticism, elasticity, things like that. So what governs our ability to move fast is our nervous system and how fast your nervous system can signal for the muscles to activate and also relax at the same time. So with the Marv Marinovich stuff, I really like the ball work because you're having to adjust. You have these water weights and you're on a ball and you're going through full ranges of motion, but it's very reactive. You have to stop suddenly and reverse. And it's working off of reflexes. It's not necessarily working off of a conscious or concentric movement. Your body has to react. Well, what are we doing in javelin? We're, reacting to all the ground contacts. We're finding positions amidst the chaos. And that's why I think the Marinovich ball work helps a lot with. And I also have been implementing some of that stuff in the pool as well, is you're training for chaos and you're training the ability to turn off and turn on really quick. And what we see in elite performers is they're super relaxed. You look at Jan Zalesny, he has zero inhibition in his body when he's throwing. There's no level of, he's not scared or anything. He's relaxed and it looks effortless. How do you make the hardest movement maybe in all of sports to look so effortless? And it's the ability to actually turn off and control your body in that way.
something that Marv Marinovich's training like brought me to was Troy Polamalu speaking about it, and I'm sure you've seen the clip and watched it.
Yeah, the NFL films.
Yeah, so
That's great.
his stuff that I think is really cool is how he doesn't have to think about being fast. Like, he just is fast. And I think for any high level athlete, like for you saying it looks effortless, it's just because for them, I believe they're not trying to throw far. They just know they can. So they're letting their training almost speak out on the runway. And as they go down, they're just fluid, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. I know Dan posts that one a lot and likes that post. But it's just controlled aggression that is fluid and almost artist-like, that is just can float.
Art. Exactly. And they're able to just let their body take over. They're able to let their hindbrain take over. They have no governor on their body. And I think that's what makes them so great. And at the same time, that's where some of that Jay Schroeder stuff comes in is, you know, if you can hold position in a 5 minute isometric or even pull into position for 5 minutes, you get rid of these inhibitions and you teach your body, what muscles to turn on and what muscles to turn off. So then when you go on the runway, it's reflexive. It's not something you're thinking about because thought, conscious movement is much slower than a reflex.
Something that you were talking about like the mindset too, and I think that goes back to the holistic style approach. And it's something with Jay's work is that going into those isometrics with with a clear mind and like a mental approach into it as well is huge because any type of self-doubt or any type of mental inhibition will prevent your body from doing the task at hand. And I think that's what's really important about his work. And I think that people, they see the flashy Adam Archuleta drops and the switches and stuff. That is great to train the physical, but was really interesting with that style of training is how they worked on the mental side of things as well. So you can just go out there and perform and not have that mental inhibition.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with the isometrics also, what's so great is it teaches you such an awareness of your body in space. When you're holding a position for, 3 to 5 minutes, you really get acquainted with what muscles are activating, what ones need to turn off. Because if you are in a lunge position, for example, and you're not activating your hamstring, then your quad takes over and you fatigue much quicker and you're gonna fail. So there's an effortless way of movement, and there's a certain way your body must, activate and turn on, and the way the central nervous system activates muscles. That's important so that you're more efficient, and that efficiency translates to your movement on the runway and in your throws.
Have you noticed a big difference incorporating more of this?
It's my superpower, I would say, was the isometric stuff. I was heavy on that even in high school, and I think that allowed me to pick up the skill of javelin a lot quicker because, I was acquainted with this awareness of my body and I was able to tell where my body was in space. And for javelin, I mean, really in a technical sport, that's your sport, is your technique. So it allowed me to make changes a lot quicker than I think other people are able to.
So correct me if I'm wrong. There's three types of throwers, right? I think I've heard of you said this before, like the power thrower, the technique thrower, and the speed thrower. Are those the three?
Yeah.
Which one are you?
So I've kind of oscillated between all of them. I would say I'm a technical thrower, and there's been times where I've been a power thrower with good technique, and there's been times where I've been a speed thrower with good technique. So I'd say my freshman year, I was definitely more on that speed end of the spectrum. I would run in pretty much as fast as I could and just launch it. And then I think I refined my technique a lot, and I, gained 20 pounds, and I was more of a technical power thrower. And that's where now I feel like I have to kind of go back the other way because I have the strength, I have the technique for the most part. I'm making some tweaks, but can we layer this absurd amount of speed into the throw? How speed, I would say, is the quickest way to improve your throw at the end of the day. I mean, your technique, of course, but if you're in a pinch and you're in a meet, just run in faster and it's gonna bring more energy. And if you can transfer that energy better through your technique, then you're really gonna throw far.
Yeah, I think Jim Freeney had a post on that the other day, Javelin Jim, and he was talking about how I forgot what thrower it was, but he was coming down the runway and he was just saying, some people will see a bad block, but others will see a fast approach. And I thought that was huge because I hate the block. I think that it's super overrated. I think that a lot of people, it's one of those arbitrary cues that people just throw out. There'll be 100 things wrong with the kid's throw, and the block leg is bent, and then the coach will just say, "Oh, you need to fix your block," or vice versa, where a kid will send me a video or another kid will give another kid advice, and there's 100 things wrong, and they got the bent block leg, and they're just like, "Oh, it's your block." And it's like, no, it's actually how you set it up, and a lot of other things. A lot of it's timing. A lot of it's what energy are you using, right? Because I always talk about the passive throwing side, like rotating into the active block side. So a lot of times if your throwing side is active and then your block side is passive, that could be why your block, quote unquote, is bent or whatever. So there's just so many different ways to get better at the throw, but you need to know what you're actually looking for.
Exactly, exactly. And the block is a measure of, how did you transfer everything into the throw? And a lot of a lot of kids, I was even like this. I had a good block, but if you don't have the energy behind it, then the throw still doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, hypothetically, you could do a one step and have a perfectly straight block leg. It's still not going to go as far as if you were to do a full approach and have a bent block leg because you're coming in with more speed. I mean, if that simple sentence that I just said doesn't simplify it for you, then I don't know what will.
Exactly, exactly.
I think it's cool to see like the depth drops like that. I always try to relate it to the training, but yeah, obviously if you jump off a 12-inch box, it's gonna be a lot easier to stop when you land. Yeah. Raise that box up to 60 inches, and you're getting up to 6 feet in the air, and you have to catch yourself at the bottom and completely stop and absorb that contact. Like that's gonna be a lot harder.
And this
So
is and this is with that analogy, this is where the nervous system training I think comes into javelin is, if I see a lot of kids that are inhibited to throw out of a full approach. Quite honestly, they're even a little bit scared. And I think if you raise that ceiling of what your body is able to handle, if your brain feels safe jumping off of a 36-inch box, a 48-inch box, you're going to feel safe throwing from a full approach. You have to get used to these higher end speeds and these ground contacts to then be able to use your full approach and actually, have the brain feel safe and not have inhibition. I think that's about 90% of the sport is just not being inhibited when using your full approach. So you can actually control your body in it and, time it up and transfer that energy.
have you used any overspeed work, like someone pulling you with the band as you go into the approach?
I like that. I haven't tapped into that, but that's something I'm really gonna start to add in this year. Is I did a lot of resisted stuff in the past, and I actually think this year I'm gonna switch to more of that assistance because, if you're able to handle running in at 8, 9 meters a second, and then 7 meters a second is a great approach in javelin. If you can transfer the force from 7 meter a second approach, you're gonna throw really far. But that might take, being able to handle a little bit higher ceiling.
That's something that Dan Fichter talked about with.
I love Dan Fichter. I've met Dan Fichter.
You've met him?
Yes, I met him at TFC in Iowa,
Dude, how was he in person?
2021. He's amazing. I love the neural warm-up stuff. I actually got real big into like reflexive performance reset. I think
Yeah.
that's another thing that can kind of free inhibitions in your body. We're walking around with chronic pain and compensation patterns, and you don't want that, if you want high performance.
Have you gone down the square one rabbit hole yet?
I've done Signal 6.
Okay.
I've actually been on a Zoom with Sean Sherman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yes. So I think that stuff is legitimate. I like a lot of it. It's something easy you can add in, as a part of that neural warm up, and you can be ready to go then when you walk on the runway.
So you've heard of Dan talking about when he would sprint downhill 40s, downhill 40s, running 3.9s.
Yeah.
And he's like, my body is able to do it. So like when I go out into the field, there's no inhibition. And his big thing was being able to wake up any time of the day and then go do it. And that's just what you're saying with like the central nervous system being able to have it ready at all times. Like that to me is what elite athleticism is.
Yes. And I think that's a critique too of, I love traditional lifting. I think that, making your muscles stronger definitely helps. But at the same time, I think your nervous system can kind of get dull and you can develop some compensation patterns if you're not also training the other side of the spectrum like that. If you ignore the central nervous system, then I've had times where I've had trouble getting out of bed at 8 in the morning to do anything. You just feel bogged down.
Yeah, go do some German volume training, do like 10 sets of 10 back squat, and then you can't walk for a week.
Yeah, exactly. That's the opposite of what we want.
Yeah. Mike, do you think you'd be a coach anytime soon? Like once you're done competing or?
Yeah. So I kind of work with some guys, just help them out. But I do think I would like to be a coach, especially with some of the strength stuff. I really think this nervous system training is kind of the way to go going forward. And, you can have heavy lifts. Your nervous system is going to be able to produce that force if you don't have that inhibition. And I think there's a smarter way to go about things. I think that's really intriguing. I think I would like to coach.
Anything else you would want to talk about with your training, your process, or?
I mean, I think we cover most of it. I'm gonna have some big stuff coming out soon though about the style of training, and I'm gonna start pushing that a little bit. So
No, I'm excited. I'll definitely be sharing that because we've been on our neuro kick for a while.
yeah, that stuff is gold. So
Yeah, and I think that too, it just is a testament to show where Javelin is in terms of strength and conditioning. And I just want to make this point clear that with us being track athletes and track coaches, we, like Brett said, it's a maximum power output event. And our goal is to get that out of our athletes or out of ourselves. And so if you're neglecting the strength and conditioning side, then you're not going to be a good javelin thrower. And I'm not talking about just doing the lifts like you were talking about, but I'm talking about targeting the mobility stuff, targeting the CNS stuff, targeting the fast twitch movements. And just hearing, a college athlete like yourself come on the podcast and talk about some of these training principles that Brett preaches all the time, and that these other coaches that we're having on are talking about, the central nervous system and the RPR and the neurology behind things, is I think that shows where the high level javelin throwers and coaches are at, which I think is awesome, because you're essentially taking these athletes that are having this own sense of pride in their training, and these coaches that are thinking, as sport coaches, thinking beyond just the technique, which is super, super essential to be able to produce the best result with our athletes. And I think that's why I always love being able to have every aspect of control in my athletes. Is I'm doing the strength stuff, I'm doing the mobility, I'm doing the technique as well. I'm not tossing it up to, all right, you go work with your strength coach over there, and then when you come with me, we're talking game plan and so on and so forth. Like, I know that's how other sports operate, but I just take a lot of pride in the fact that javelin, the high level javelin throwers and coaches in the industry right now are pushing that initiative.
Yeah, and that's what's intriguing about javelin and track and field in general to me, was we have to be on the cutting edge of all these training ideas, because our sport is output driven. Your number is your number, and there's no changing that. There's no other variables. It's on you. And so you have to be on the cutting edge of training. You have to, no stone unturned. And I think that's what's really intriguing.
All right, Mike, thanks for coming on. We got to have you on again at some point.
Yes.
We got to run it back with you and Kevin. Get you on the TV again.
Let's run it. Let's run it back for a neural training podcast at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
You got Dan Fichter's number?
Actually, I my brother probably has it. So my brother worked with them at one point.
No. All right. Well, that is like a Mount Rushmore of me for guests. So if we can figure that out, I mean,
we can get him on.
You got Alex Hermosi?
That's your guy. That's your guy. That's your guy, man.
We have different Mount Rushmores of coaches.
All right, Mike. Thanks so much for making the time. All right.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you,
Mike.
Peace, see you guys.
Thanks for tuning in.
And if you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and review and share the show, because the only way that this show grows is if you like it, share it, and tell your friends and family about it.
New episode every Monday.